Imagine this. Karen, with her typical sense of entitlement, decided to take matters into her own hands and installed a gate around my pool without asking. But instead of just sitting back and letting it slide, I decided to turn the tables. What Karen didn't know was that I wasn't about to let her cross the line without consequences. I wasn't just going to remove the gate, I was going to make sure it stayed protected in a way she'd never expect. Enter my dog, trained to guard the pool with a life vest and ready to send a message she'd never forget. It all began the day I came home to find something that would spark a chain of events I never expected. Karen had installed a gate around my pool. Now let me tell you, there's nothing more infuriating than someone taking it upon themselves to alter your property without even so much as asking for permission. And the nerve of it, Karen had done just that, without any communication or agreement on my part. As if she could simply decide what was best for my own home. When I first laid eyes on the gate, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just any gate either. It was tall, imposing, and completely unnecessary. There was no warning, no heads up from the HOA, no consultation with me about what was going on. It was simply there, standing like a silent authority that had taken control of a space that belonged to me, without any regard for my rights as a homeowner. The audacity of it left me stunned for a moment, and then came the anger. Karen, in her usual self-righteous fashion, had made a claim that the gate was for safety. She said it was because kids might wander into the pool. But I knew better. My pool had always been properly secured. I took great care in ensuring that it was safe, and I hadn't had a single incident in all the time I'd owned the house. Not a single child had ever wandered into the pool, nor had anyone complained about the safety of it. But here was Karen, using her position in the HOA to impose her will and interfere with my private property, without any real justification. It wasn't just about the gate itself. It was about what that gate represented. Karen thought she could simply decide what was best for my space, my home, my life. She saw herself as some kind of neighborhood enforcer, as if her role in the HOA gave her the right to make decisions for everyone else. She couldn't just live and let live. No, she had to go around, controlling things that had nothing to do with her. But this time, she had gone too far. The anger hit me like a wave. It wasn't just about a simple gate. It was about the principle of it all. She had decided on her own that something on my property needed to be changed. She had crossed a line. And what made it worse was the fact that she thought she could get away with it. She thought that because she was Karen, because she had some clout in the HOA, that I would just roll over and accept it. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the gate that now blocked part of my yard. The more I stared at it, the more infuriated I became. I had worked hard for this home. I had invested time, money, and effort into making it a place where I could relax and enjoy my life. And yet, here was Karen, deciding what was best for me on her own terms with no regard for my input. But as the anger started to settle, something else began to happen. A thought crept into my mind. What if I could turn this around? What if I could use Karen's own arrogance against her? After all, she was the one who thought she could control my life. Well, maybe it was time to show her that there were consequences to crossing the line. I began to think of ways I could reclaim control, to make her realize that her actions were not going to go unnoticed. I could simply take down the gate, of course, but that wouldn't send the right message. No. I needed something more. Something that would make it clear to Karen that I wasn't going to just accept her interference. I wasn't just going to let her dictate what happened on my property. That's when the idea hit me. I had a dog, one who was fiercely loyal and protective. What if I could train him to guard the pool? But not just guard it in the usual way. No, I was going to do something she wouldn't expect. I was going to turn my dog into the ultimate protector, one that would make her think twice before ever trying to cross my boundaries again. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined. If Karen thought she could just walk in and take control, then I would show her that I wasn't someone to be pushed around. I would use the resources I had at my disposal to make sure she knew that crossing me had consequences. It wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about taking back control and standing up for my right to decide what happens on my own property. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to remove the gate. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with her attempt at control. I was going to make her realize just how wrong she was to think she could impose her will on me. This was no longer a simple issue of property. This was a fight for my rights, and I wasn't about to lose. The problem with just ripping down the gate immediately was that it wouldn't send the right message. It wasn't enough to simply remove the physical barrier Karen had placed on my property. The situation demanded something that would stick with her. The last thing I wanted was for her to run straight to the HOA, cry wolf, and claim that I was being aggressive or unreasonable. I needed to make sure that whatever action I took would not only protect my space, but also send a clear, unmistakable statement to Karen that her actions would not be tolerated. This wasn't about a simple dispute over a gate anymore. It was about standing up for my rights. I needed a plan. Something clever that would show Karen she couldn't just walk over me without facing some serious consequences. That's when I looked over at my dog, who was lounging lazily on the porch, as if he was waiting for me to figure out the next step. My dog wasn't just any ordinary dog. He was well trained, and I had spent countless hours working with him to perfect his skills. He wasn't just a pet. I had trained him for specific purposes, including guarding the property and responding to commands that ensured he could help protect our home. His training was more than just for show. It was practical. I had carefully taught him how to respond to different situations, how to stay alert, and how to follow commands that would keep us safe if necessary. This was exactly the kind of situation where all that training was going to come into play. I knew that turning my dog into the ultimate guard dog for the pool area would be the perfect way to get Karen's attention. But this wasn't going to be a standard guard dog scenario. It wasn't just about having a dog sitting at the gate or barking at intruders. No, I wanted to do something unexpected. Something Karen wouldn't be able to predict. That's when the idea hit me. I would train my dog to wear a life vest. It may sound strange, but there was method to the madness. Karen had no idea what was about to unfold. I wasn't just going to have my dog sit by the gate and growl at her. Instead, I would put him in the life vest to add an element of surprise. The life vest, in a way, would symbolize that I wasn't just protecting my property in a typical way. It would be a statement, a visual reminder that I wasn't playing by Karen's rules anymore. I was in control. The life vest was more than just a cute accessory. It had a purpose. By having my dog wear it, I could be sure that he would not only look the part of a well-prepared guard, but also be more visible and harder for anyone to ignore. If Karen saw him wearing the vest, it would send a message. This wasn't just a dog protecting my pool. It was a dog who meant business. I wanted Karen to realize that every time she tried to cross the line, she'd be met by a well-trained, unexpected defender. I began the process of training my dog to wear the vest. At first, it wasn't easy. Dogs aren't typically fond of wearing clothing or anything out of the ordinary, and I knew this would take some time. But my dog was smart and obedient. Slowly but surely, he got used to the vest, and I started getting him comfortable with the idea of wearing it while patrolling the pool area. The more I worked with him, the more I could see that he understood the purpose of the task. He was sharp. He knew when to stay alert, when to be on guard, and when to act. It wasn't long before he became the perfect canine sentry. While my dog was getting ready for his role, I worked on creating a strategy for how to integrate him into the situation with Karen. I knew that if she saw him in the life vest and recognized him as part of my defense plan, she'd be immediately thrown off guard. That was the key. She would expect the gate to be a simple barrier, but what she wouldn't expect was an empowered dog who was ready to step in and stop her every move. I also knew I had to make sure the dog was more than just a deterrent. He had to be effective. He wasn't there to be a mere symbol. His presence needed to be enough to make Karen hesitate before trying anything. The idea was simple. Every time she approached the pool, every time she even thought about getting near that gate, my dog would be there, alert and ready to intervene. The best part? She'd never see it coming. She wouldn't expect the dog to be trained to the level I had him at, and she certainly wouldn't expect the life vest to be part of the strategy. I wasn't just protecting my pool anymore. I was sending a message to Karen and to anyone else who thought they could push me around. I wasn't going to let her dictate what happened on my property. The gate she put up might have been her first move, but I was already planning my next steps, and those steps involved an incredibly well-trained dog who would stand his ground and make sure she didn't cross the line again. It was about more than just getting even. It was about making sure Karen understood that she couldn't control my space. This was no longer just a petty dispute over a gate. It was a lesson in boundaries and respect. And I had the perfect tool in my hands, a dog who was ready to defend what was mine, and a plan that would make sure Karen never crossed the line again. After days of preparation, everything was finally in place. The life vest had become a second skin for my dog, and the training sessions were now paying off. He had learned the ins and outs of guarding the area, responding to my commands, staying alert, and becoming an unwavering presence by the pool. I had no doubt that this would be the moment I could reclaim control. But I also knew that it was time to take this fight directly to Karen. Each day that passed, Karen seemed more smug. Every time I saw her, there was that air of self-satisfaction, like she had won some petty victory over me. Her pride in that gate was almost tangible. It was as if she believed she had successfully imposed her will, securing control of a part of my property without any sort of consequence. But I wasn't about to let her keep thinking that way. I watched from a distance one afternoon as she walked past my house, heading straight for the pool area. She had that same smug expression on her face, ready to flaunt her victory once more. What she didn't know was that she was walking straight into a situation she couldn't control. This time, there wouldn't be any open gates, no simple passive barrier for her to manipulate. This time, she would encounter something far more unexpected. As Karen approached the gate, I could see her pausing to inspect the area, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She reached out for the gate to open it, like she had done countless times before. But as her fingers brushed the cold metal, something changed. Something shifted in the air. It was the sudden movement of my dog from behind the gate. With the grace and precision of a well-trained guardian, he leapt forward. The life vest he wore caught the light from the sun, its bright color a stark contrast against the backdrop of the pool area. For a moment, Karen just stood frozen. She had no idea what she was seeing. Her eyes widened in shock and confusion as she tried to comprehend what was happening. A dog? A dog wearing a life vest? What on earth was going on? It wasn't just that there was a dog guarding the pool. It was the sheer audacity of it. The life vest made the dog look like something more than just a pet. It made him look like a sentry, like he was not just part of the scenery, but actively part of a bigger plan. And that's exactly what it was. I wasn't just defending my pool, I was sending a clear message to Karen. The silence that hung in the air was almost deafening. Karen's hand remained on the gate for a few seconds longer than it should have, as if she was processing what she was seeing. This wasn't the scenario she had expected. She had probably imagined that the gate would be a passive barrier, one that simply marked a boundary for the pool area. She hadn't anticipated a situation where I had turned the tables, adding an element of surprise that would make her question her every move. Her confusion was palpable. She slowly pulled her hand back from the gate, her eyes still locked on my dog. But she wasn't backing away. No, she stood there, staring at him, probably wondering what kind of game I was playing. She didn't know the half of it. The training sessions had prepared my dog to act in these types of confrontations. He wasn't there to just look intimidating. He was there to protect, to stop anyone who tried to cross that boundary. Karen wasn't going to just stroll in and think she had free rein anymore, not while my dog was on patrol. In that moment, I saw something in Karen's face that I had never seen before: hesitation. It was as if she was unsure whether she should push forward or retreat. The confidence she usually carried so easily had faltered for a split second, and that split second was enough. My dog stood firm, watching her every move with unblinking eyes. His presence alone was enough to disrupt her plans, but Karen wasn't the type to give up easily. She regained her composure quickly, but the hesitation didn't leave her. She took a step back, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was processing, recalculating her next move. It was clear she hadn't anticipated any of this, least of all a dog standing guard in a life vest, ready to make sure she didn't get what she wanted. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The tables had turned. I had gone from being the one who was frustrated and helpless, dealing with her impositions, to the one in control. Karen may have thought she had won when she installed that gate, but I had a much more strategic defense in place. It wasn't just about putting up a physical barrier. It was about showing her that I wasn't going to roll over. I wasn't going to let her impose her will on me any longer. And what made it even sweeter was that Karen didn't know how to react. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for a dog who had been trained specifically for this kind of situation. She wasn't prepared for the life vest that had been carefully chosen to make a statement. Every detail of this plan was intentional, and now I was watching her process it all, trying to figure out how to regain the upper hand, how to push forward when she was so clearly out of her depth. As Karen finally backed away from the gate, I could see her trying to gather herself. But the damage had already been done. She had seen what I was capable of, and more importantly, she had seen that I wasn't going to let her control my space. This was only the beginning. Karen's initial shock began to give way to frustration as she tried to take control of the situation. She attempted to command my dog, calling him in a harsh tone, hoping that he would respond to her voice as he had always responded to mine. But it became quickly apparent that this wasn't just any ordinary dog. He wasn't listening to her demands. He wasn't trained to obey just anyone. His loyalty was to me, and that was something Karen wasn't prepared for. With every command she issued, my dog stood firm, his gaze unyielding. He wasn't distracted and he wasn't confused. He simply continued his watchful stance, staying between her and the gate, blocking any attempt she made to cross the line. Each time she tried to move closer to the gate, he would position himself perfectly, cutting off her path. Karen's frustration grew as she tried to circle him, but every time she moved, so did my dog, anticipating her every attempt to gain ground. It was as if the game had completely changed. Karen had believed that she could simply impose her will on my property. She had thought the gate would be a sufficient barrier, and she'd assumed that once she had control of it, there would be no consequences. But now she was faced with a situation that no amount of entitlement could solve. She was standing in front of a physical boundary, but more than that, she was up against something she couldn't manipulate or control. She had underestimated me, and now she was starting to realize it. The dog wasn't the only thing she was up against. It was the fact that I had taken steps to protect my space in ways she never expected. Karen's mind was racing, trying to figure out how to regain the upper hand. She could feel the pressure mounting. There was no easy escape from this moment. The more she pushed, the more she realized she had no real leverage. She could try to call the HOA, escalate the situation with complaints, but none of it would matter in the face of the clear boundary that had been established. She wasn't just dealing with a gate or a simple inconvenience anymore. She was up against something much more effective. And what frustrated her even more was that she wasn't able to understand the full scope of what was going on. Her entitlement, which had been so apparent before, began to crack. Karen was so used to getting what she wanted, so accustomed to simply taking control of situations without any real resistance. The idea that someone might stand their ground and use their resources, my dog in this case, as a defense mechanism was something Karen couldn't wrap her head around. She tried again to assert herself, her voice rising in volume, but it wasn't having the effect she hoped for. My dog wasn't backing down, and neither was I. We were both firmly committed to the task at hand. The more she tried to argue, the more she realized how powerless she was in the face of this setup. She could demand I take the dog off guard duty, she could insist that I remove the life vest, or she could go straight to the HOA and try to make a case. But none of those things mattered. I wasn't going to budge, and the fact that I had created a system of defense with the dog was something she couldn't undo. The HOA wouldn't have the power to intervene in a matter of personal safety and property defense, and Karen knew that. It was a bitter pill for her to swallow. For the first time, she found herself at a complete loss. What Karen didn't understand at that moment was that this was more than just about protecting my pool or ensuring that the gate wasn't tampered with. This was about setting a precedent. She was learning in real time that her actions had consequences. There was a line, and she had crossed it. This wasn't a game of simple tit-for-tat anymore. She had tried to take control of something that wasn't hers to control, and now she was facing the fallout. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to piece everything together. She could feel her control slipping through her fingers, and the frustration was mounting. The more she tried to assert her will, the more it became evident that I was not going to be manipulated or intimidated into submission. My dog wasn't just acting on instinct. He was a reflection of my resolve. He had been trained for this specific purpose, and now he was standing his ground, not because I told him to, but because he knew exactly what needed to be done. Karen's grip on the situation was slipping with each passing moment. Her frustration boiled over into desperation, but there was no escaping the reality of what was unfolding. I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't something she could just talk her way out of. It wasn't something she could threaten or bully me into changing. The more she tried, the more she realized that she was powerless in this moment. The facade of her entitlement began to crumble as she understood the full extent of my defense system. The dog, the life vest, the boundary. Each element was working together, reinforcing the idea that I wasn't just protecting my property, I was making it clear that I wouldn't let her trample on my rights. For the first time, Karen was faced with a level of resistance she couldn't just bulldoze through. It was an uncomfortable realization for her, one that she couldn't easily dismiss. And in that realization, Karen understood something that would stick with her. When you mess with the wrong person, there are consequences you can't just wish away. Karen thought she could simply install a gate and walk away, leaving me with no choice but to accept her control over my property. She believed that by following a familiar pattern of entitlement, she could bully me into compliance. It was clear that she had grown used to getting what she wanted, without pushback, without consequences. But that illusion was about to shatter. Her attempt to dictate the terms of my own property had just met a firm resistance, one that she hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about a pool gate or a trained dog. This was a lesson she would never forget. What Karen didn't understand was that she had crossed a line I had spent days carefully establishing with the life vest and training my dog. Every action I took was deliberate. The dog was more than just a defense mechanism. He was a symbol of my commitment to protecting my space. His presence signified that I wasn't going to back down. That life vest wasn't just a tool. It was a clear statement that I had taken control, and I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me, not even her. As Karen stood there, slowly processing what had just unfolded, the weight of her actions began to sink in. She had underestimated me, She thought I'd just roll over because she was used to people like her getting away with everything. But she hadn't accounted for the fact that I had set my boundaries, and I was prepared to defend them, no matter the cost. She hadn't realized that, unlike others, I was willing to take it further and use every resource at my disposal to protect what was mine. It became clear to me that Karen had a long history of assuming that her actions had no real consequences. The HOA and her endless manipulations had always worked in her favor before. But this time, it was different. I wasn't going to let her continue imposing her will on me just because she had the privilege of power. That gate she installed, the barrier she thought would give her control, was meaningless in the face of my defense strategy. What Karen failed to grasp was that boundaries are not just physical. They are psychological too. The very act of standing up to her, of not backing down, was enough to show her that she couldn't push me around anymore. This situation wasn't just about a minor confrontation. It was a turning point. The dog, the life vest, the unwavering defense of my property, everything about this moment screamed that I wasn't someone she could intimidate. It wasn't even about me getting what I wanted anymore. It was about sending a message that I would never allow anyone to step on me or my property. And once that message had been sent, there was no going back for Karen. She had learned that not everyone would bend to her demands. Karen's next move, of course, was to escalate the situation. She'd likely go to the HOA, and I was ready for that. What she didn't know, however, was that I had anticipated her every move. The HOA wouldn't side with her, not after everything that had transpired. I had documented everything, the installation of the gate, the way she had trespassed on my property without permission, and the fact that I had taken reasonable steps to protect myself. I wasn't going to let her spin the situation in her favor this time. The truth was, Karen could make all the calls she wanted, but the real consequences were already in motion. It was no longer about who could talk the loudest or make the most complaints. It was about who had the resolve to stand firm. I had drawn a line and I wasn't crossing it. And no matter how hard she tried to push back, Karen was going to have to face the reality that she had no power here. What Karen was beginning to understand, albeit slowly, was that actions have consequences. She had imposed her will on me, assuming she could take control of my pool area without any backlash. But now, it was clear that she had miscalculated. She had triggered something that could no longer be undone. She could complain, she could threaten, but the fact remained that she was no longer in control of the situation. In the coming days, I knew she would continue to test my resolve. She would likely try to force the HOA into action, hoping they would side with her and tell me to remove the dog or the life vest. She might even try to stir up a crowd to put pressure on me. But none of it would matter. The moment she crossed that line, I had already proven that I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of my own property. There was no quick solution for Karen. She had now learned that I would stand my ground. And for the first time, she realized that her actions had consequences. She couldn't take back the steps she had already taken, and no matter how much she tried to manipulate the system, she would never get away with this again. She had underestimated me, and the consequences were now hers to deal with. This wasn't just about one isolated incident. It was about setting a precedent. Karen would never forget this. The next time she thought about pulling something like this again, she would remember the dog in the life vest, the clear line I had drawn in, the sand, and the fact that no one messes with my property without facing the consequences. This was the beginning of a new chapter for me, one where my boundaries were respected and where my right to protect my space was never questioned again. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more about the wild, dramatic, and unexpected moments of HOA life, make sure to subscribe to the HOA Stories. Hit that bell icon to stay updated on every new shocking tale we share. Don't miss out. Join the community and keep up with the drama, because these stories are just getting started.